thanks for coming in. We're really excited about Enemy Territory Quake Wars. We're going to kind of keep things informal. We have just the two guys who live and breathe this game every day. They're going to come up and give you a little behind-the-scenes tour of the game, show you the map basically that we're playing out here and that you saw in the trailer, but show you a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of the game. So and then we're going to do a Q&A afterwards for you to ask any questions you want about ETQW. So I first want to bring up Kevin Cloud, one of the owners of id Software and executive producer on the title. Wedgwood, the owner and lead designer on Enemy Territory Quake Wars from Splash. Let him take it away.
All right, thanks, Marty. For those of you who don't know, it's Enemy Territory Quake Wars. It's an id Software title being developed by Splash Damage. We've been working on this game together for the last 3 years. And so we are super excited to be here at QuakeCon to get it in the hands of gamers for the first time. So we're excited to get your guys' feedback after this. We're excited to get your guys' questions. Want to know what you guys think about the game. Now, Enemy Territory is set in the Quake universe, you know that. The year is 2065. What that tells the story of is the Strogg invasion of Earth. So what we have is this alien technology facing off against conventional weaponry. So it's unique that it allows us to have these two very, very different teams facing off against each other. And it creates really unique gameplay that I don't think people have experienced before in this type of game. It also features some pretty cool new technology from John Carmack. It's our mega texture technology. And this is unique. It allows us to have one massive texture for the entire environment rather than a lot of tiled textures. And I think, as you'll notice if you see the game here and if you play it out there on the show floor, this is really a different look that you haven't seen in any other games. But perhaps probably the most exciting thing about the game, we think, is the team play.
Absolutely. The spiritual predecessor to this game is Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, which probably most of you have played at some point.
Yeah!
Kevin and I were co-designers on that project. We developed it over at Splash Damage with masses of collaboration with id Software. It was our first game. Our history was kind of as mod makers. I'm going to go into that a bit later. And so really, I guess the thing about this game is that team play really is everything. So what you'll see, and I hope we've got this up on the big screens now, or will do shortly, with the limbo menu, which people who play Wolfenstein Enemy Territory will be fairly familiar with, you have this kind of traditional approach to selecting your character class and selecting your team. What's really changed is this notion of territories and objectives. Now, just like in Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, you know, where we tried to retell the story of some big battles from World War II, Enemy Territory Quake Wars tells the story of the big battles of the Strogg invasion of Earth. And so with Valley, which is the map that we're showing here at QuakeCon, what you have is the Strogg have a prionite contaminator. They're trying to poison the entire local population and render them defenseless so that they can be Stroggified, obviously. The GDF, well, they want to stop them. So what you have is a series of linked objectives ending with the destruction of the Strogg prionite contaminator. And we're a bit obsessed with trying to link things thematically with inside maps. We did pretty much the same thing with Wolfenstein Enemy Territory as a follow-up to Return to Castle Wolfenstein multiplayer, which Nerve Software developed. On this map, then, to destroy the prionite contaminator, which is really just a soldier placing a heavy explosive charge, we first need to bust our way into the building. So we want to launch a strategic strike missile against it, but the Strogg have a defense shield, so that needs to be taken down. To launch the strategic strike missile, we need to take an outpost, so we have to get an MCP there to capture the outpost, and to get the MCP there, we need to construct a bridge. So this series of linked objectives is pretty straightforward when you're playing through the game, you know, over a 20-minute period of time. Obviously, it sounds a bit more complicated when I just list them out, you know, in 30 seconds. I'm going to jump into the game though, and just pick a character class and show you a couple of things.
Now, what we have here is We actually have the guys out on the show floor. There, I believe it's 8 players that will be in here, and they'll be playing the game, and we'll be trying to keep up with that and demonstrate and talking about what they're doing as they're playing the game. So it's basically live action, them just doing what they're doing to fight along and accomplish the objectives. And Paul and I are going to try to narrate that.
So one of the things that's really important to us is team play, and we really want to build on what happened in Wolfenstein Enemy Territory. This is done with really subtle things like simple animations. So a character class's complete loadout, the health packs that he carries, his pistol, his assault rifle are all carried on the class. All of the animations that are appropriate to that character class are played out. So when you're running alongside a guy who's playing a specific combat role, if he reaches for a pistol or reaches for a medic pack, he plays all of the appropriate animations. When a soldier's reloading his general purpose machine gun, you can see him reloading. You don't have to have any kind of HUD information to show you what's going on. It's all synced first and third person. And this is for every tool, item, and weapon in the game. And I'll show you some more of that in a little bit. So my team, they're going to be heading off up the hill. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the objectives that I just talked about. You can see towards the end of the road there's a tunnel. And there's a destroyed bridge here that we want to try and get constructed. This is so that we can get the mobile command post over to the outpost. There's naturally going to be a certain amount of combat that happens around this bridge. So the GDF are going to start trying to launch an assault, and the Strog are going to start trying to defend it as soon as warm-up turns off. While we're waiting for that to happen, I'm going to take you through a couple of bits on the vehicle physics.
This is one of the things to sort of keep in mind about our approach to the game. From the beginning, we've really focused on creating an entirely multiplayer game. And so we did start off with the Doom technology, but we basically went back in and looked at it all from the perspective of what do we need to do to make a great multiplayer game. And that includes reworking the physics, reworking the networking, as well as reworking the rendering. So some of the stuff Paul's going to be showing you is a lot of the work that went into trying to make vehicles as fun as possible in this type of game environment.
So if we can get a message back to the guys that are planning to take warm-up off, then the game's going to start. That was pretty good. So I'm now playing engineer, and my role is to help construct the bridge. So I'm going to grab a Husky quad bike and head up there. So we have a pretty cool vehicle physics system. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. But the basic premise of it is that we have proper articulated suspension. We have things like, well, I guess I'm dead. They're called Hornet hovercopters. They're fundamentally evil and are going to die. What I'm going to try and do with God mode on is construct this bridge. We've lost audio, I think. So right now playing on this server are just 8 people. Don't run away. Died, kind of. Just playing on this server at the moment are around 8 people. One of the things we found with having a focused front line that exists in and around the objective and the two teams fighting either side is that you tend to get a level of intensity which is really unlike that where people disperse across the map trying to find combat. This was true in Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, and it's fundamentally true in Enemy Territory Quake Wars as well. So I'm going to try and get this bridge constructed while my team focus on the objective. One thing I do want to say quickly is that with Enemy Territory's classes, and we're going to come back and discuss these in more detail in a bit, they have a whole bunch of different tools, items, and abilities, and things could just be generally a bit overwhelming at times. Because of this, we've tried to kind of improve accessibility a bit. you can run up to any entity that you can operate and just press your F key and it'll switch to the right tool and start doing the most appropriate things straight away. We just guess that you don't need to know it's in slot 7 when you first jump into the game if you want to be able to do something to something in the game. So I'm constructing the bridge. It's 2 stages. Upside down hornet that can't fly. Drunken hornets. I'm going to tell you guys about the physics of the flying in a little while. The propulsion systems that we use for the vehicles are specific to each vehicle, and I'm going to go into some of that as well. So I'm going to no-clip for a bit and just fly up and show you what's going on. We've now constructed the bridge, so our job is to try and get this mobile command post to the outpost on the other side of the tunnel and deploy it. Now what happens is that when we complete an objective, we capture territory. When you capture territory, your spawns move forward, you start to get additional vehicles, and you have additional space for deployment. So one of the things I'm going to do is deploy an anti-personnel turret. An anti-vehicle turret, I should say.
One of the things to notice while you're seeing Paul move around here is there's actually no fog plane. There's no far plane crawling. You can see all the way across the map. This is what I guess John calls the brute force rendering. It's a byproduct of the way the mega texture works and the way that saves us on the polygon data. But that also creates a really unique type of gameplay where basically the entire battlefield's at play.
I can give a pretty good example of that on the mega texture over here. I say most of you, I'm sure, know what no-clipping is, the flying around the map thing. It's not a superpower of the GDF. The mega texture, it's a really big texture. We couldn't think of a better name for it. We have a system in the game that distributes stuff around the map. You know, debris, cans, and twigs, and old bits of crap. It's called the stuff system. We're not that great at marketing. But the mega texture really is a very, very big texture. It's 32,000 by 32,000 pixels of completely unique detail across the entire map. Now, one of the things, the benefits of this, which is a bit like normal mapping, you know, those of you that are familiar with the normal mapping process, is you have this kind of what looks like a high polygon surface because of the way the texture's applied to a low polygon model. So we'll have a scene like this where, you know, you can see the cracks and the crevices, you can see the water line, all of the unique detail. It's clearly not using tiled textures, and should, you know, for all intents and purposes, be using a fair number of polygons. But if I turn on show trees, what you'll see is that there aren't really that many in use at all. Now, what this does for us is allows us to use a system called brute force rendering. Brute force rendering renders stuff by brute force. The idea of brute force rendering is that you can render absolutely everything to the horizon across the entire map without having to worry about what you're drawing. Now, this is really important for gameplay because one of the most frustrating things, at least for me, is that if you're in a dogfight or something, you know, when someone disappears into that fogged far plane, or you're trying to snipe someone, or you're engaged in combat and they disappear into fog, it just kind of ruins the experience. When we constrain visibility with fog or other precipitation, you know, like rain or snow, we do so because the level designer doesn't want you to see too far because he's using it as cover or concealment for the enemy team. With the mega texture, this presents a bit of a challenge for level designers in the community because, you know, the average guy who previously would spend a couple of months working on a Quake 3 map, well, he's going to be a bit frustrated painting inch-level detail for a square mile. So we have a system in the game called geometric texture distribution, and this distributes textures geometrically. This system, geometric texture distribution, allows you to have all of your textures set up with specific properties and material types. So grass will grow up an incline at sort of 25 or 30 degrees, but when it gets above that incline, you'll start drawing moss. You can have rock at high altitudes, which looks more weathered and grey, but nearer the kind of water table, it's more organic. What this means is that a level designer who's making a map in the community, once he's kind of got his terrain figured out, he can just set the theme that he wants, the textures he wants to use, click go, and it automatically distributes all of the initial textures across the landscape, placing everything in the right location. We then have a thing called the decal stamp tool. I won't explain it. And when you're done stamping your decals, you have what is effectively a unique map. And so you'll see as we move around this level, oh look, there's a Goliath. We can paint all kinds of unique stuff all over the map, wherever we want. It's a photo of me. We can stick a whole bunch of stuff all over the map and create landmarks for players that makes it easier for them to remember what it is that they're looking at. Now at this point in the game, where those 8 guys are probably frustrated that we're not paying any attention to their combat, the mobile command post has finally made its way out of the tunnel. It's being beaten on by a couple of hornets. The GDF are trying to use airstrikes to take out things like the Goliath that's defending the base. But basically they're trying to get the mobile command post into this outpost over here at the back. When they take this command post, the mobile command post can fire a strategic strike missile. Well, it could if there wasn't a Strug defense shield. So you'll see that this sequence of objectives actually ends up being fairly straightforward. I imagine I'm safe here for the moment. And you'll see that the territory has been captured as the team is moving up. So the GDF now have the 2 pieces of green territory, and the red territory is the territory that they're trying to take from the Strog. When they take that outpost and they get the MCP into the central area, the next piece of territory will turn green, and the front line shifts between the next green piece of territory and the next red one. So you see where the arrows are right now is clearly the front line of the map. Now in gameplay types like capture and hold, which have existed since the early Team Fortress days, what would happen is that you'd basically run around the map to your 5 or 6 capture points, and you'd spend all your time trying to find somebody to fight. But in a game that only has 8 players, you'll still have a bunch of people all congregated around this natural front line that exists between the 2 pieces of territory. And so because combat isn't dispersed, you always know where to go to fight. So there's always tons of action, or that's the general idea.
And I think that's one of the things that brings the sort of a unique difference to this type of gameplay and why it's such a team play focused game. Because everybody, they don't have to be all focused around the objective, but everybody's basically working towards that common goal. The other thing is because the game doesn't play out like a sporting event where you're sort of going back and forth with points, you actually have a huge amount of intensity in trying to accomplish that one goal at that one moment. And once that objective is gone, you can't get it back. And so there's a level of intensity in playing this type of gameplay that you just don't have in other multiplayer games.
So what they're trying to do now is hack this objective on the other side of the bridge. Because the GDF have now got helicopters in taking this outpost, they get access to an Anansi and to a Bumblebee, which is the big troop carrier here. The front line shifts to the area across the dam, and you tend to get combat that occurs on the centre of this bridge and in the dogfights taking place above. So what I'm going to do is switch character class to a guy called the Covert Ops, which is kind of the evolution of the guy from Wolfenstein in Enemy Territory, and show you a few of his kind of key skills. Another example of the animations, if I start running with a 2-handed weapon, if I sprint, you'll see that it drops to show that I can't shoot my sniper rifle, and I'm actually grasping it against my body while I'm running along. If I switch to the pistol, there's finally an explanation for why it is that you can run faster, because I can actually run 2-handed correctly. And this is correct for all of the weapons that exist in the game. So when you see somebody running with a rocket launcher and they're kind of running with it against their chest, you get a sense finally of why it is they're running slower than everybody else. If he throws it over his shoulder and switches to a pistol, he can now sprint with a pistol as fast as he likes. We don't have stamina in the build anymore. Since the maps are pretty big, it's frustrating to run out of stamina when you're running around. And we figured that soldiers can run more than half a mile without getting tired anyway. Because they couldn't in World War II because of the rations and stuff. So what I want to try and do is sneak into the base, which I've not had because I'm in God mode. He didn't make it.
There are all types of different things that we're trying to do to add depth to the game without creating a lot of complexity. Weapon selection will determine how low you crouch. Weapon selection determines how far you move forward, how fast you move forward, where you're in a prone position. So it's a lot of things that basically we're trying to get in there that we've noticed over the years that we think the gamers would like. That probably the average gamer may not pick on, but certainly the advanced gamers are going to queue on pretty quickly.
I'm probably within the splash radius of this. See splash damage. Sorry. So we're now trying to take this sniper rifle's not going to help. It doesn't seem fair running around in God. Oh, what the hell. So I'm going to try and hack this Strug shield generator, which of course isn't going to be a huge challenge because I'm still in God mode. But we need to move the presentation on. Again, I just hit F. Now what this is doing is stopping the shield generator from shooting down strategic strike missiles when we fire them. With that out of the way, here comes our strategic strike missile. I don't think they're going to survive it. So now this is the final objective. We have to place a heavy explosive charge at the Priorite contaminator. They really do exist, by the way. No, they don't. So what we're going to try and do is get a bunch of soldiers in there who have heavy explosive charges, and you'll see the combat really shifts to a kind of indoor urban combat. And this is a transition that happens pretty regularly on our maps. We have areas that are great for vehicle combat at certain stages of objectives. We have areas that have a ton more urban and interior combat, and we have sections of the map where you're fighting, and dogfighting really is the thing that's most beneficial, or deploying artillery guns for doing artillery strikes. Now they clearly have no defense, but that's the final objective there. So I'm going to show you some things with the vehicle physics as we've got a little bit of time left. I'm going to zip back to the base quickly over here.
One thing to keep in mind about the difference between like the outdoor combat and the indoor combat is because of our class system is really a structured class system. It's not just a weapon loadout. It really changes. It's not going to work. It really changes the way the combat behaves once you're in indoors as opposed to outdoors. Changes the way your field ops have to work with you. Changes the way your medics have to work with you. And so, in all of our maps, we try to balance that. So it's just not, it's just not just a big outdoor battlefield. There's actually a lot of sort of close indoor combat to give everybody sort of the type of gameplay they want.
So we talked a little bit about physics earlier, and really about why it is that the physics are different in Enemy Territory Quake Wars than other multiplayer combat games. Now, one of the reasons for this is that when we started working on Enemy Territory Quake Wars, we knew from the very beginning that we were going to be making a pure multiplayer game. So ordinarily, when you when you start making a multiplayer game, you have the single-player game that you're bolting it onto, and you start stripping away at the physics system and the graphics technology and taking out detail to make everything work across the network and support 24 people being on screen all the time. With Enemy Territory Quake Wars, because we knew we were going to do this from the very start, we were able to build the physics system with networking in mind. We were able to build the networking system with networking in mind. And we were able to deal with a lot of graphics problems because we had it in mind from the beginning that it was going to be a pure multiplayer game. So a good example of this would be the way that we deal with things like suspension and propulsion. The vehicle physics models are pretty realistic. If you look at a vehicle that has 6 wheels, we actually had to make 4 wheels turn because the vehicle couldn't turn without having 4-wheel turning. If I start attacking it, I can shoot, bits and components off of it and stuff, which will have an effect on gameplay in some way or other. But I can also disable the vehicle rather than going in for an actual attack. So I can start shooting off wheels, and it will actually collapse. And because some of my wheels will still have traction, it will actually start dragging itself around still. I can do the same with all of them, and it will eventually collapse. And there it is, with 1 wheel. Now, as it is in the E3 build, an engineer that jumps into a vehicle automatically starts repairing it. So I'm going to switch back to the medic so that doesn't happen. I'm just going to repair it a bit first. These magic pliers make magic wheels. It's in the future. So you can see I've only got 4 of my 6 wheels still present. If I switch to medic just to stop it from automatically repairing the vehicle when I jump into it, you'll see now when I jump inside, I don't have quite the normal level of mobility. But of course, being amphibious, driven by 2 propellers at the back, once I'm in water, it's back to normal. So when it's actually amphibious, it is being... when it's amphibious, it actually is being driven by propellers appropriately, and it doesn't really rely on the wheels to move the vehicle around. But back out of the water again, obviously that becomes more relevant. And this is the same for every vehicle in the game. In fact, if you look at something like the Titan tank, if I take it somewhere where there's a little bit of off-road, some obstacles.
The Titan has 3 crew positions: a driver, a gunner, and a commander. Press change keys to toggle internal and external views and use to switch positions. Pilot aims the weapons which the consent is taken. Use the mouse wheel to cycle weapons.
That was slightly premature. I'll see if I can't get them to restart the map. So in the interim, I could tell you a little bit about how the game got going, since I don't have anything else to do at the moment. Back in 2000, I came to my first QuakeCon as a guest of id Software, and back then I was working with a mod team for a mod called Q3F for Quake 3. I don't know if any of you remember it. It's going back a bit. Quake 3 Fortress. That's 4 people. Quake 3 Fortress was pretty popular back then, and I came out as a clan player. I played for a clan called Clan Earthquakers, which is arguably, and I say arguably because I will argue about it, the oldest Quake clan in the world. And we played in a lot of UK and European tournaments. We played Team Fortress, moved on to Quake 3, played Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, and then John Carmack, he released the source code for Quake 1, and Team Fortress just kind of went away. So we wanted to put together a mod for Quake 3 that was similar, and we were inspired by Team Fortress and put together Q3F for Quake 3. And we worked on that probably for around 2 years. Loads and loads of help from Robert Duffy at id. In fact, we've got a whole presentation here. It's like an hour long on Saturday about how we got started in the industry. And we're going to have a whole bunch of advice about how to get into the games industry, how to start a games company, stuff about the kind of financial side of it, business, production, art and design. Well, anyway, after about 2 years, despite us, taking 2 years to make a mod, we managed to convince id that they should give us a chance to go commercial, and we started working on Wolfenstein Enemy Territory. We spent about a year and a half on Wolf ET working together, and God knows why they let us start Enemy Territory Quake Wars.
No, I worked on Return to Castle Wolfenstein and worked with Nerve on Wolfenstein multiplayer. And so it's just sort of a natural evolution. There's a lot of ideas you come up when you're making a game, and we kept those ideas and we turned it into Enemy Territory when Paul and I started working together. So it's been about 5 years now.
Yeah, it must be. So this is my 7th QuakeCon, which I'm quite proud of. But I can't spawn a tank, which I'm not proud of. Is on out here somewhere. I use network spawn, I did. It'd be funny if someone spawns now and steals it.
This is the Titan tank.
So this was the last vehicle I was going to show you physics on quickly, just to give you a basic overview of how this stuff works. You know, ordinarily in a game, especially multiplayer combat games, vehicle physics are really a rigid body model, just a square box moving over a smooth piece of terrain, and the terrain has to have all of its obstacles and things cleared to make this whole process realistic. What you'll see when you look at the triangles is that the tank tracks actually use a kind of traditional IK approach. So what this means is that if you expect a vehicle to deal with a piece of off-roading, an obstacle that's in its path or whatever, appropriately, then it will do. This means that the feedback you get is generally appropriate. So, you know, if you jump into that's handy, I wanted one of those. If you jump into something like a Badger truck, and I hold down the handbrake, then it will start to rev because it can't go forward. If I start to move forward and I boost the vehicle and I tap on control, the handbrake, then I'm going to do a handbrake turn. If I put my pedal down a lot and start hitting control, I'm going to be able to do a donut on the spot. So the vehicle physics are appropriate. They're what you'd expect them to be. And for that reason, we can put things like jumps and tricks into maps designed for vehicles, for you guys to find, to give you alternate routes to get to different locations. So for example, on this map, there are a few places, you know, where the Husky quad bike is particularly effective at getting through to a specific route. So if you imagine playing something like playing the Covert Ops class, where you're generally going solo, and you're off on an infiltration mission, you know, you want to deploy a radar near the edge of territory, using something like the Husky quad bike, and you know, and doing vehicle jumps and stuff is going to make a difference because you can get to places that other people can't get to.
Charges on the contaminator.
That's about it. You want to go for questions?
I was just going to cover the field up stuff very quickly.
Okay.
If you guys want to see it.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so I didn't talk much about deployment. It's kind of a real-time strategy element of the game, and it really adds depth because, of course, you can build up your base. There are 3 character classes in the game that deploy actual deployables, physically static items that provide a benefit to the team. The Covert Ops deploys radar, and this basically gives you the big sweeping radar on the command map that shows you where the enemy is located. We have the engineer, who's able to deploy anti-vehicle, anti-personnel, and anti-missile turrets, and then the field ops, who's able to deploy artillery and so forth. So I'm going to start quickly by just selecting an artillery gun. So you'll see I have the choice of rocket artillery or strategic strike missile, and I think you guys have seen the strategic strike missile fire already. Now, depending on the size of the thing that you deploy, it gets delivered in different ways. So for example, this is an artillery gun, and it's fairly big, so it has to get delivered by a Magog Sky Crane, which takes a little bit longer to arrive. There it is.
We've lost the forward spot.
Now, when you target artillery,
We captured the forward spot.
the fire spot for the field ops is kind of like the choice you make when you're playing soldier. You know, if you choose the general purpose machine gun, it's really effective against personnel. But if you choose the rocket launcher, it's more effective against vehicles. Now, both are fairly effective against the other types of enemy target, but they have this kind of rock, paper, scissors dynamic that allows you to make a decision which is most appropriate for the objective that you're currently focusing on. For the field ops, it's a similar choice. The artillery gun's really good against personnel. The rocket artillery, you can target and track moving targets with, so it's good for moving targets. The strategic strike missile is good for attacking stationary targets like deployables. So I'm going to use artillery just to fire off a couple of rounds here so you get a sense of how this works. So I basically just lock on. You'll see that the gun actually turns around and starts firing. You get the smoke first, so you know it's time to run. I may have forgotten to put God mode back on. And then really the... Medic! Not a lot of medics around on this server. These 4 seconds are brought to you by id Software.
Destroy the contaminator.
And then one of the other nice bits of the field ops is his airstrike. Now, we had the airstrike in Wolf ET, but we wanted to have something that was a little bit different. And we wanted it to involve something real that would actually come hammering in. So I'm quite keen on that. Yeah, we could jump out and take some questions and stuff if you like.
And the thing that also keep in mind for things like that with the field ops, for everything that's a big offensive attack like that, we also have defensive systems. So the Strong are able to put up defense shields. They're able to go behind enemy lines, take out the fire support with things like EMP grenades, or actually just go ahead and destroy it.